Would you answer if the lake whispered your name? The question hung in Emily's mind as the van wound its way through the twisting mountain road, the words echoing from some half-forgotten ghost story her grandmother used to tell. She had always thought of it as nothing more than a creepy folktale, something told around campfires to keep children from wandering too close to the water. But now, as the peaks rose higher and the forest closed in on either side of the road, the memory felt like an omen. The company trip had been Nate's idea, team building, he called it, a chance to leave the fluorescent lights of the office behind and actually breathe fresh air together. 10 of them in total, all crammed into 2 vans, their laughter and chatter bouncing off the windows. They had rented a cluster of cabins beside a quiet mountain lake, miles from the nearest town. The photos online had promised serenity, wooden porches, canoe rentals, crisp pine-scented air. For once, Emily hadn't argued. She had been craving an escape too, even if it meant spending a weekend with the same people she saw 5 days a week. By the time they arrived, dusk had already swallowed the mountains. The cabins were smaller than expected, their paint faded, roofs bowed slightly as though the years had weighed too heavily on them. But the lake was beautiful, vast and still, the surface like black glass, reflecting the moon with such clarity it felt as though the sky had been laid down on earth. A thin fog clung to its edges, drifting lazily across the water, but otherwise it looked untouched, almost sacred. They unpacked, claimed bunks, and gathered around a fire pit that had been set up between the cabins. Sparks rose into the night as someone passed out beers, and laughter soon echoed through the trees. For a while, it felt almost normal. Emily sat with her hands wrapped around a cup of wine, the warmth seeping into her palms as the night air grew colder. She listened to her coworkers, Jason boasting about how he beat everyone at canoeing, Lila complaining about spotty reception, Marcus trying to roast marshmallows and failing spectacularly. But her eyes kept drifting back to the lake. It was too quiet. No frogs, no crickets, not even the ripple of a fish breaking the surface. Just stillness, as if the water was listening. Later, after most had gone to bed, Emily lingered by the fire with Nate. He stared out at the water too, his expression unusually serious. "You ever hear stories about places like this?" he asked softly, his voice barely above the crackle of the flames. Emily hesitated. "What kind of stories?" "You know, the kind where the locals say don't go near the lake at night. Where people vanish and nobody really explains why." She forced a smile, but her stomach tightened. "Sounds like you've been watching too many horror movies." Nate didn't laugh. He tossed another log onto the fire, the sparks briefly lighting his face, and muttered, "Maybe." That night, in the cabin, Emily woke to a sound. At first, she thought it was the wind moving through the trees, but as she held her breath, she realized it was more deliberate, rhythmic, like someone whispering just outside the window. Carefully, she slid from the bunk, her bare feet silent against the wood floor, and approached the glass. The lake stretched out, still and endless, reflecting the moon. And then she heard it clearly. Emily. Her own name, spoken in her own voice. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't a trick of the wind. It wasn't her imagination. The sound rose from the water itself, soft and distant, like her voice had been recorded and played back at half volume. Her heart pounded violently, every instinct screaming at her to answer, to step outside, to find the source. Her lips parted before she realized it, the urge almost overwhelming. But then, from the bunk behind her, someone stirred. Lila mumbled something in her sleep, rolling over, and the spell broke. Emily clamped a hand over her mouth, stumbling backward. When she dared to look again, the lake was silent. The surface glistened peacefully, black and unbroken. She crawled back into bed, trembling, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders. She told herself it had been a dream. That exhaustion had played tricks on her. But deep down, she knew the truth. The lake had spoken. And it had used her own voice. The morning brought laughter and the smell of coffee brewing, but Emily barely touched her mug. She kept staring at the lake through the window of the cabin's small kitchen. The water gleamed under the pale sunlight, calm and still as glass. Nobody else seemed to notice anything unusual, Jason was already bragging about his fishing skills, Lila was taking selfies by the porch railing, and Marcus was trying to convince everyone to go canoeing before breakfast. Emily forced herself to smile and join in, but the memory of the voice gnawed at her. It hadn't been a dream. She knew what she'd heard. By noon, half the group was out on the lake in rented canoes, their laughter echoing across the water. Emily stayed on shore with Nate, claiming she was not a water person. They sat on a wooden dock, watching the canoes drift lazily, the paddles dipping into the dark water. "You okay?" Nate asked suddenly, his voice low. She looked at him, startled, and saw something in his expression, something that told her he had heard it too. But before she could ask, Jason stood up in his canoe, arms spread wide, laughing. "Hey!" he shouted. "Listen to this." At first, they thought he was just goofing around. But then he tilted his head, as if listening to something far away. His grin faltered, replaced by confusion. "That's weird," he muttered. "What is it?" Lila called from another canoe. Jason squinted at the water, then laughed again. "You guys hear that? Someone's calling me." Emily's chest tightened. Nate stood up so fast the dock creaked beneath him. "Jason! Sit down. Don't answer it." But Jason looked directly into the lake, his expression strangely dazed. "It's me," he whispered, his own voice trembling with disbelief. "I'm calling myself." Before anyone could stop him, Jason leaned over the side of the canoe. His lips moved as if in response to something only he could hear. And then, without a splash, without a struggle, he was gone. One moment he was there, leaning over the water, and the next the canoe rocked violently, half tipping, and Jason's seat was empty. Screams erupted. Lila nearly capsized her canoe trying to paddle closer. Marcus shouted Jason's name again and again, his voice cracking with panic. But the lake remained eerily calm, ripples fading as though nothing had happened. No bubbles, no thrashing, no sign of him beneath the glassy surface. Just silence. "Jason!" Nate roared, falling to his knees on the dock, scanning the water. Emily clutched his arm, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The others kept shouting, paddling frantically, searching the surface. But deep down, Emily knew it was useless. The lake hadn't taken Jason like a drowning victim. It had swallowed him. Then came the voice. Soft, distant, rising from the middle of the lake. Jason's voice. Calling out. "Hey, guys! Over here!" Lila froze mid-paddle, her face pale. "That's him. He's okay." She started to steer toward the sound, but Emily screamed, "No! Don't answer!" Her voice was raw, desperate, but she couldn't explain why. She only knew. If Lila answered, she'd be next. The others fell into terrified silence, their eyes wide as Jason's voice continued to echo across the water. It was unmistakable, his tone, his inflections, but warped somehow, stretched thin, like it was traveling from somewhere far beneath the surface. Nate gripped Emily's hand so tightly her knuckles ached. "Don't listen to it," he whispered. "It's not him anymore." The group sat in shocked stillness, the canoes rocking gently, as Jason's voice faded into the fog rolling low across the water. The lake had fed. And now it was waiting for another answer. The canoes scraped against the dock as the others scrambled ashore, their voices overlapping in panic. Lila was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching Marcus's arm, while Chloe kept pacing back and forth, her hair sticking to her damp face. "He just vanished," Chloe whispered hoarsely. "People don't just vanish like that." "He's not, he can't be," she broke off, pressing her hands to her mouth as if the rest of the sentence might summon something worse. Emily sat frozen at the edge of the dock, staring at the empty space where Jason had leaned over. She could still hear his laugh, sharp and cocky just moments before he slipped into silence. It replayed in her mind like a cruel echo. Nate crouched beside her, his voice steady but his face pale. "We need to get everyone back to the cabins. Now." But as the group stumbled back through the woods, the air felt heavier. The silence wasn't the natural quiet of the forest, it was oppressive, suffocating, as though the lake's stillness had spread into the trees. Every twig snap underfoot made them flinch. Inside the cabin, no one spoke for a long while. Lila curled up on the couch, clutching Jason's hoodie she'd snatched from his duffel bag, rocking back and forth. Marcus paced near the window, muttering curses under his breath. Chloe sat at the table, her face pale and wet with tears, staring blankly at the wood grain as though trying to carve sense from it. Emily hovered near the fireplace, her arms wrapped around herself, while Nate stood guard at the door, shoulders squared, eyes locked on the lake through the glass pane. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "We call for help. There's got to be a ranger station or something." He dug into his pocket, pulling out his phone, but the screen glared back with no service. Chloe tried hers. Nothing. Lila's hands trembled as she held hers up, dead battery. "Are you kidding me?" Marcus snapped, his voice pitching higher. "This isn't the goddamn wilderness. We passed a dock, a ferry. People come here." Emily's voice was quiet, brittle. "What if they don't anymore?" Heads turned toward her, her words hanging heavy in the stale cabin air. She hadn't meant to say it aloud, but the thought had been clawing at her since Jason vanished. Nate stepped in quickly, trying to steady the group. "It doesn't matter. We'll walk back down to the dock in the morning, find someone. Right now, we just need to stay inside." But the night came faster than they expected, the light bleeding away behind the mountains until the lake was just a sheet of blackness under the rising moon. The group gathered in the living room, a fire crackling low in the stone hearth. Shadows stretched across the walls, flickering, distorting their faces into something almost unfamiliar. That was when the voice returned. It drifted through the cabin walls, faint at first, just a thread of sound carried on the wind. But then it grew stronger, clearer, and every one of them recognized it instantly. "Jason. Guys?" The voice was plaintive, confused, calling from the direction of the lake. "I don't know what happened. I can't see you. Where are you?" Lila shot to her feet, nearly knocking over the lamp. "That's him. He's alive." She darted to the door, but Nate blocked her path, gripping her shoulders so hard she winced. "No. It's not him," he said firmly, his voice steady though his eyes were haunted. "You saw what happened. You heard it. That thing is using his voice." Lila shoved against him, her sobs breaking into rage. "How do you know? What if he's drowning? What if he's calling for us and we're just sitting here?" Emily's stomach knotted as she listened. The voice outside was too perfect, too deliberate. Jason's tone, his cadence, but stretched with an unnatural calm, like a recording played on repeat. "I'm cold, come help me." Chloe buried her face in her hands. Marcus swore under his breath, his fists clenching and unclenching. No one moved toward the door. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps, echoing against the wood as if knuckles had struck the cabin's frame. Every head snapped toward it, the room plunging into absolute silence. Outside, Jason's voice continued, now closer, just beyond the threshold. "Please. Let me in." Emily's heart thudded against her ribs so violently she thought it might burst. She wanted to scream, to cover her ears, to drown out the impossible sound. Because deep down she knew, if they opened that door, they'd never see daylight again. And yet, when she glanced at Lila, she saw the girl's trembling hand inching toward the handle. The room felt like it was holding its breath. The fire in the hearth snapped and hissed, but no one moved, no one dared to exhale. The knock had been real, 3 sharp, deliberate strikes against the door, each one echoing in their bones. And then that voice, Jason's voice, so close now it might as well have been whispering through the crack beneath the door. "Let me in. Please. It's so cold out here." Lila's trembling fingers hovered inches from the doorknob, her body leaning toward it like a moth drawn to flame. Her face was streaked with tears, her lips parted in a silent plea. Nate clamped a hand around her wrist, yanking her back so forcefully she let out a cry. "Don't," he growled, his voice low, guttural. "That's not him." Lila wrenched free, glaring at him with raw fury. "How can you say that? How can you stand there and decide who lives and dies? You don't know." Her voice cracked, and she pressed her hands against her chest as if trying to hold herself together. "What if he's out there freezing, dying, and we just—" "It's not him," Emily cut in sharply, her own voice surprising her with its force. Everyone turned toward her, and she realized she was shaking, her fingernails digging crescents into her arms. But she held their gaze. "It doesn't sound right. It sounds like him, but wrong. Too clear. Too," she hesitated, searching for the word. "Too hungry." The silence after that word was suffocating. Even the fire seemed to dim, casting longer shadows across their faces. Chloe whimpered softly, rocking in her chair, while Marcus began to pace again, his boots thudding against the wooden floorboards. Then the knock came again. This time softer, but more insistent, like fingertips dragging across the wood. "It's me. Jason. Please open the door." Everyone flinched. The voice was pleading, breaking, almost pitiful. Lila covered her ears and shook her head violently. I can't just sit here. He needs us." Marcus suddenly stopped pacing and turned toward the group, his eyes bloodshot and wild. "What if she's right? What if we're overthinking this? He fell in, sure, but maybe he made it to shore, maybe he's hypothermic. And we're just sitting here letting him die because of some creepy sounds in the woods." He jabbed a finger toward Nate. "You don't get to play God." Nate's jaw clenched. He looked like he wanted to fight, like the strain of keeping everyone alive was crushing him. "You didn't see his face when he went under," he said flatly. "I did." He didn't come back up. Another knock. Louder this time. The wood groaned as though something heavy leaned against it. And then, with terrifying clarity, Jason's voice called again. But this time, it said something different. "Marcus. You're the only one who believes me. Open the door." Marcus's head snapped toward the entrance, his breath hitching in his throat. The sound was unmistakable, Jason calling his name, his exact inflection, his exact tone. His shoulders rose and fell with each ragged inhale as he moved a step closer to the door. "Don't you dare," Nate warned, moving to block him. Marcus glared at him, fury flashing across his face. "How do you explain that, huh? How does a monster or ghost or whatever the hell you think this is know my name? He's out there. He's alive. And you're all too scared to admit it." Lila nodded desperately, clinging to Marcus's arm. "He's right. We have to try." Emily's throat went dry. Something in her gut screamed at her that this was wrong, that Jason's voice, whatever it was, wasn't Jason anymore. But Marcus was already gripping the handle, his knuckles white. The others lunged toward him, but he was faster. The lock clicked, the hinges groaned, and the door swung open. A rush of cold air blasted through the cabin, extinguishing the fire in a violent hiss. The flames vanished, plunging the room into shadows. For a moment, there was nothing, only the sound of the wind whistling through the trees. The doorway yawned open into the night, and beyond it, the black sheen of the lake glimmered under the moonlight. No Jason. No footprints in the dirt. No one waiting on the porch. "Jason?" Marcus whispered, stepping forward into the night air. That was when they all heard it. The voice again, but now it didn't come from the trees, or the path, or even the porch. It came from the lake. "Marcus." The surface rippled, a low vibration spreading across the black water as if something massive stirred beneath it. The echo of Jason's voice carried over the lake, bouncing back unnaturally, repeating his name again and again until it became a distorted chant. Marcus froze at the edge of the porch, staring toward the water. The others watched in horror as his body swayed, his face slack, his eyes glassy. It was as if something invisible had reached out and hooked into him, pulling him forward step by step. "Marcus!" Emily screamed, but her voice broke against the walls of the cabin. he was already descending the porch stairs, moving slowly, entranced, toward the lake's edge. Nate grabbed a lantern, racing after him, but Marcus was faster. The chanting grew louder, overlapping echoes rising into an unbearable cacophony. Marcus reached the waterline, his boots sinking into the mud. And then, without hesitation, he walked straight into the lake. The night air bit at their skin as they rushed from the cabin, Nate's lantern bobbing wildly in his hand, its light scattering across the clearing. Marcus was already knee-deep in the lake, moving steadily, almost serenely, toward the open water. His body swayed as though in a trance, his arms loose at his sides. His lips moved, but no sound came from them, only the echoes carried from the lake itself. Marcus. 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 The voice layered upon itself, rippling across the surface like waves of sound. It wasn't Jason's anymore, not entirely. Beneath the familiar cadence was something deeper, older, like a chorus rising from the belly of the lake. Marcus, come closer. Marcus, don't be afraid. Emily's scream pierced the night. Stop. Marcus, stop. She tore free from Chloe's grip and ran to the shore, the mud sucking at her shoes as she skidded to a halt just a few feet from him. His eyes flicked toward her, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she'd reached him. His pupils dilated, his lips trembled, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. Then his head snapped forward, gaze locked on the horizon, and he stepped deeper. Waist deep now. Chest deep. Marcus. Nate thundered, splashing into the water after him. The lantern swung dangerously from his hand, threatening to extinguish with each movement. Snap out of it. You're not yourself. But Marcus didn't turn. He was smiling now, a wide, eerie smile, like someone seeing something beautiful just out of reach. His voice finally broke free, whispering, I hear them, they sound like me. And then he was gone. One moment he was there, the next the water surged upward with a violent splash, swallowing him whole. The surface rolled once, twice, then stilled again, as smooth and black as glass. Nate plunged forward, the lantern nearly toppling into the water, but the current beneath the surface tugged at his legs with unnatural force. He staggered back, breathless, as though something beneath had brushed against him. He knew without seeing, if he went any deeper, he'd never come back. The others screamed his name from the shore. Chloe was hysterical, clutching her own hair, while Lila collapsed to her knees, wailing Marcus's name over and over. Emily stared in frozen silence, her eyes fixed on the lake, waiting, praying for him to resurface. But what came wasn't Marcus. The lake shuddered with a low vibration, like the groan of something vast shifting below. Then, drifting across the black surface, his voice rose again. Not one voice, but many, overlapping, echoing out of sync. Emily. Lila. Chloe. Nate. The sound was unbearable, like hearing your own name whispered in your ear from 100 unseen mouths. The lake called to each of them in Marcus's voice, twisting his tone into something grotesque. Emily clamped her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just around them, it was inside them, vibrating against their ribs, threading into their bones. She squeezed her eyes shut, whispering, It's not him, it's not him. Nate finally staggered out of the water, drenched and shaking, his lantern flickering dangerously low. He dropped to the ground beside the women, his chest heaving as he gasped, He's gone. He's gone, and if we don't keep our heads, we're next. Lila snapped at him, her face twisted with rage and grief. You don't know that. He could still be out there. You left him, you let him drown. She struck his chest with both fists, sobbing uncontrollably. Nate caught her wrists, holding her still, his own eyes glistening with tears. You didn't see it, he rasped. The water took him. It pulled him under. That wasn't Marcus anymore. The echoes continued, softer now, drifting over the water like a lullaby. Emily. Lila. Chloe, each name drawn out, sweet and sickly, like a promise. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there listening. But something inside her whispered the truth she didn't want to admit: the lake was feeding. The group stumbled back into the cabin, bolting the door, shoving furniture against it, though deep down they knew wood and metal meant nothing against whatever lurked in the lake. Lila collapsed on the couch again, rocking violently, whispering Marcus's name between sobs. Chloe sat on the floor with her knees to her chest, her eyes vacant, as though she were already half gone. Nate leaned against the wall, dripping wet, his jaw tight, his eyes haunted. Emily crouched near the fireplace, staring at the faint embers struggling to glow again. Her mind replayed Marcus's last words over and over: "I hear them, they sound like me." The lake didn't just echo. It mimicked. It consumed. And now, it knew all of their names. Just as she thought this, a soft knock rattled against the window pane behind her. She turned, her breath hitching. Through the glass, pressed against the misty surface, was Marcus's face. Pale, wet, eyes wide and glassy, but smiling. And then, in his voice, but too perfect, too hollow, he whispered, "Emily, let me in." Emily's scream froze in her throat. She stumbled backward from the window, her shoulders slamming into the stone of the fireplace. The others turned sharply, their eyes following hers to the glass. There was Marcus. His face hovered just beyond the pane, pale in the moonlight, beads of water clinging to his skin like dew. His hair was slicked flat against his head, dripping, his clothes plastered to him as though he'd just crawled out of the lake. His smile stretched too wide, too calm. And yet, his eyes. They looked like Marcus's eyes, tired but pleading, brimming with desperation. "Emily," his lips formed her name again, his voice muffled but eerily clear through the glass. "Why did you leave me? Please, let me in." Lila bolted upright, her face lighting with a spark of hope. "Oh my God, Marcus! He's alive!" She shoved past Chloe and Nate, racing toward the window, but Nate intercepted her, seizing her by the arm so hard she yelped. "Stop!" His voice cracked like a whip, harsh with fear. "That's not him." Lila twisted in his grip, tears streaming down her face. "Look at him! He's right there. He's breathing, he's talking, he's Marcus." She clawed at Nate's arm, trying to break free. "You just want us all to sit here and die while our friends drown outside." "Lila," Emily said, her voice shaking, "look at his mouth." They all stared. Marcus's lips moved with perfect clarity, but the timing was wrong. The sound of his words trailed just a fraction behind, as though the voice wasn't truly his, but an echo projected over his image. "Let me in. I'm so cold." The firelight flickered across the glass, and for just a second, his reflection in the window pane didn't move in sync with him. His face tilted, his smile widening impossibly, while the body outside remained still. Chloe let out a strangled sob, burying her face in her knees. "It's not him. It can't be him." But Lila wrenched free from Nate, her grief and desperation blinding her. She rushed to the door, fumbling with the barricade. "You can stay in here and rot if you want, but I won't. I won't leave him out there alone." "Lila, don't." Emily lunged, grabbing her wrist, but Lila twisted violently, eyes wild, mouth frothing with rage. "You don't understand. He needs me. He called my name." The sound outside shifted, the echo deepening, Marcus's voice layering with something older, something cavernous. "Lila, come to me." That was enough. Lila tore the lock open, swung the door wide, and bolted into the night. The cold wind rushed in with her, snuffing what little warmth remained. They heard her feet pounding across the porch, the frantic crunch of dirt beneath her shoes, and then her voice calling out, "Marcus! Marcus, I'm here!" The three left inside froze, their blood running cold. Because the voice that answered her was not Marcus's anymore. It was hers. "Lila. I'm here." Her scream ripped through the night, raw and piercing, and then was cut short, swallowed by the sound of water churning. The lake roared like something alive, its black surface writhing as if a hand had reached up and dragged her beneath. Emily, Nate, and Chloe stumbled to the window in time to see the ripples spreading across the lake, fading slowly into stillness. No trace of Lila remained, only her voice, now joining the chorus rising from the water. Chloe. Emily. Nate. Chloe collapsed, her sobs turning into broken, hysterical laughter. It's using us now, she clawed at her ears as though she could dig the sound out of her skull. Nate slammed the door shut and shoved the barricade back into place, his chest heaving. His face was pale, streaked with water and sweat, but his eyes burned with something new, determination. It's not taking any more of us. Do you hear me? We stay inside. No matter what we hear, no matter what we see, we do not answer it. Emily wanted to believe him. She wanted to think the cabin was safe, that walls and locks and fire could hold back whatever fed in the lake. But as the echoes rose outside, swelling into a perfect harmony of voices they knew, Jason's, Marcus's, Lila's, she realized the truth. The lake didn't need to break down the door. It only needed them to listen. The cabin had fallen into a suffocating silence after Lila's scream, but it didn't last. Outside, the lake began to whisper. Not a single voice, but dozens layered together, weaving into a grotesque imitation of human conversation. The water carried them like a radio tuned between stations, one familiar voice bleeding into another, Jason calling for Emily, Marcus begging Nate for help, Lila pleading with Chloe to open the door. They overlapped, repeating phrases, sometimes in unison, sometimes fractured like broken records. Emily pressed her palms against her ears, but the voices crawled beneath her skin. They weren't muffled by the wood and glass anymore, they were inside, bouncing through her skull as if the cabin itself were speaking. She glanced at Nate and Chloe and saw the same strain etched across their faces. Chloe's lips were moving silently, whispering names under her breath, while Nate paced with manic energy, gripping and unripping the poker from the fireplace like he was preparing for a fight. Then one of the voices outside shifted. It wasn't Jason or Marcus or Lila. It was Nate. Emily, open the door. It's safe now. I promise. Emily's head snapped toward him, her breath caught in her throat. For a moment she couldn't tell if it had come from outside or if Nate himself had spoken. He stopped pacing when he noticed her stare, his brow furrowing. What? But before she could answer, Chloe let out a sharp gasp. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide. I heard Emily. From the water. She was telling me to come out. Her voice shook, brittle and terrified. That wasn't me, Emily whispered, horrified. I didn't say anything. Chloe began rocking back and forth, her nails digging into her arms. No, it sounded just like you. Exactly like you. How do I know it wasn't? She turned suddenly, wild-eyed, pointing at Emily as if she'd become a stranger. How do I know you're real? Don't start this, Nate barked, stepping between them. But even his voice carried an edge of doubt, his eyes darting between Emily and Chloe as though he too couldn't shake the thought. The whispers swelled louder, filling every corner of the room. Now they weren't just calling names, they were speaking in full sentences, fragments of conversations the group had once had. Jason's laugh echoed, followed by Marcus joking about his guitar, followed by Lila's voice whispering secrets she'd told Chloe in confidence. Private things. Things the lake shouldn't have known. Emily backed into the wall, her chest tight. It's inside our heads, she muttered. It's pulling things out of us. The fire sputtered in the hearth, spitting embers that briefly lit up their pale faces. Chloe's eyes glistened, unblinking, fixated on Emily as though she might unravel at any second. Nate gripped the poker tighter, his knuckles white. Then, over the chaos, one voice rose above the rest. Calm. Clear. Steady. It was Emily's father. Emily, sweetheart, come home. Her knees nearly gave out. The sound was perfect, his tone, his inflection, even the little hitch in his breath when he said her name. But her father had been dead for 6 years. The room tilted around her. Her vision blurred. Every instinct screamed at her to answer, to run outside, to collapse into the arms of the man she'd buried. Her mouth parted, the word forming before she could stop it. "Dad." Nate lunged, clapping a hand over her mouth just in time. "Don't. You. Answer." His voice was low and savage, his eyes blazing with fear. "That's how it gets you. That's how it feeds." Emily trembled beneath his grip, tears spilling down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him, but the sound of her father's voice was so achingly real it carved her open. And then she realized something far worse. The voice wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was whispering from directly behind her, in the shadows of the cabin. Emily froze where she stood, the hair on the back of her neck rising as her father's voice drifted from behind her. Slowly, she turned toward the shadowed corner of the cabin. Nothing was there, only the dark, empty stretch between the firelight and the wall. Yet the voice persisted, soft and coaxing, every syllable dripping with affection. "It's all right, Emily. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Just, come with me." The words seemed to ripple through the air, like a current tugging at her body. Nate yanked her back toward the fire, his grip fierce. "Don't look at it," he hissed, his eyes darting to the same empty corner. Chloe pressed against the opposite wall, trembling violently, whispering under her breath, "It's in here now. Oh God, it's inside." She clutched at her temples as though trying to hold her sanity together, but the voices grew stronger, Emily's father, Jason, Marcus, and Lila, all overlapping, weaving into a siren chorus that promised comfort, escape, love. Then came the sound that froze them all. A faint dripping. Emily's gaze dropped to the wooden floorboards. A small puddle was spreading near the door, black and glistening in the flickering firelight. The sound of water trickled louder, as though the cabin itself had sprung a leak. The puddle grew, snaking across the boards, soaking into the wood with unnatural speed. The smell of the lake, damp, metallic, tinged with rot, rose around them, clawing its way up their noses. Chloe shrieked and pointed at the window. The glass fogged over, then distorted, bulging inward as though water pressed against it from the outside. Dark shapes moved within the shifting liquid, faces blurred by ripples, mouths opening and closing in perfect synchronization with the voices that echoed inside their skulls. Lila's face appeared among them, her lips forming words Chloe could almost understand, her eyes wide with pleading desperation. "No, no, this isn't real," Chloe muttered, pressing her back harder against the wall. "It's not possible." But the cabin groaned, the wood creaking as if under the weight of the lake itself. Another drip landed on Emily's shoulder, cold and slimy. She slapped it away with a cry, but when she looked up, the ceiling boards were damp, bulging, as though the water was seeping straight through the roof. The voices rose, chanting now, insistent and rhythmic. "Come out, come home, come out, come home." The fire sputtered violently, steam hissing as droplets fell into the flames, threatening to snuff them out. Nate swung the poker wildly, his eyes wild, his body taut with adrenaline. "It's not getting us. Do you hear me? We're not going out there." But Emily's gaze was fixed on the puddle near the door. It was no longer just water. Faces formed in its surface, small and distorted like reflections in warped glass. They blinked, their eyes rolling upward to look at her. One of them was her father's. One was Lila's. Another was a face she didn't recognize, sunken, gray, with hollow sockets where eyes should have been. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, grinning up at her. Suddenly, Chloe broke. With a ragged scream, she sprinted toward the door, her shoes splashing through the growing puddle. Nate lunged to grab her, but she slipped from his reach, fumbling at the latch with frantic fingers. "They're waiting for me. I can't leave them out there," she cried, her voice hysterical. Emily's heart dropped as the door swung open. Instead of air, an impossible wall of water surged inward, slamming into Chloe with crushing force. She vanished in an instant, swept into the black flood that shouldn't have existed on dry land. The torrent roared through the cabin, icy cold and suffocating, as if the entire lake had risen to claim them. Emily was thrown backward, her lungs seizing from the shock of the cold. She clawed at the floorboards as the water pulled at her, dragging her toward the door. Through the churning black, she saw Chloe's face for a moment, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream, before she was swallowed whole by the shadows beneath the surface. And just as suddenly as it began, the flood receded, vanishing out the open door. The cabin was left soaked, the fire nearly extinguished, the puddles steaming on the floor. Chloe was gone. Only Emily and Nate remained, gasping for breath in the wreckage. And outside, the lake was laughing. The silence after Chloe's disappearance was unbearable. The cabin dripped with the remnants of the flood, water seeping between the floorboards, the faint hiss of dying embers the only sound left. Emily sat shivering near the hearth, clutching her knees to her chest. Nate paced like a caged animal, his soaked clothes clinging to his frame, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles looked bloodless. Neither spoke for a long time. It was as if words themselves might summon the voices back. Finally, Nate's voice cracked the silence. "We can't stay here. If we do, we're next." His eyes darted to the black window where only his warped reflection stared back. "We have to run. Tonight." Emily wanted to argue, to say the woods might be worse, that the fog was waiting for them, but the thought of staying inside the cabin felt like a coffin closing. She nodded weakly. Nate grabbed the lantern, relit it with trembling hands, and together they stepped outside. The night was thick with mist, the lake invisible just yards away. The world felt muffled, every sound swallowed by fog, their footsteps too loud on the wet ground. Emily clung to Nate's arm as they moved toward the tree-line. Behind them, the cabin sagged like a soaked carcass, the windows glinting faintly with distorted shapes pressed against the glass. She refused to look too long, afraid she might recognize the faces. As they neared the woods, the voices began again. Soft at first, threading through the fog, then louder, closer, circling them. Not shouts, not demands, whispers. Gentle, persuasive. Emily froze when she heard her father again, but this time his tone was tender, almost pleading. "Emily, sweetheart, you don't have to be afraid. The water doesn't hurt. It feels like home." Nate tightened his grip on her arm. "Don't listen. Don't you dare listen." His voice was steel, but beneath it Emily heard the tremor of fear. Then the voices shifted. They weren't just calling her. They called Nate too. His mother's voice, soft and broken. His younger brother who'd died years ago. "Nate, it's okay. We miss you. Don't fight it anymore. Just answer us." Nate stopped dead, his face paling. His grip on Emily slackened as his head turned slightly, his body angled toward the lake though he couldn't see it. She recognized the look, she'd seen it on Jason's face before he leaned over the canoe. That dazed, vulnerable expression. "Don't," Emily begged, shaking him. "It's not them, Nate. It's the lake. It's using them." But his breathing grew heavy, tears brimming in his eyes. "It sounded just like him," he whispered. "Like he was standing right there." The fog shifted then, and through it Emily saw something shimmering just ahead by the tree-line. A figure, tall and familiar. Jason. His outline was blurred, but his grin was the same, his hand lifted in a beckoning gesture. Another figure appeared beside him, Lila, hair plastered to her face, her eyes wide but strangely calm. More shapes formed, drifting closer, their mouths moving in unison with the voices in the fog. Chloe, Marcus, Jason again. Her father. Nate's brother. All standing ankle-deep in the mist, waiting. Emily screamed, yanking Nate backward. "They're not real." But he was slipping, his eyes locked on the figure of his brother. The fog thickened, curling around them like arms, pulling. Emily realized with cold clarity that the lake didn't need to drag them physically. It only needed to convince them to surrender. Desperation took over. Emily slapped Nate hard across the face, the crack echoing through the night. His head snapped toward her, eyes wide, fury and clarity colliding in his gaze. For a moment, the spell broke. He stumbled back with her, away from the figures, into the tree-line. Branches clawed at them as they forced their way deeper into the forest, the voices following, threading between the trees. Emily's lungs burned, her legs trembling, but she didn't stop. Not until the water's smell faded and the fog thinned slightly. They collapsed against a fallen log, gasping for breath, clutching each other like lifelines. For the first time since the nightmare began, the voices were gone. But Emily knew it was only temporary. The lake wasn't done with them. Not yet. And somewhere deep in her gut, a terrible truth began to bloom. The lake didn't just want their bodies. It wanted their consent. The forest was eerily quiet. Emily and Nate crouched in the darkness, their backs pressed against the fallen log, hearts thundering in unison. For a fleeting moment, the silence felt like safety. But Emily knew better. The lake wasn't a predator that gave up. It was patient. Eternal. And it would keep whispering until their minds fractured. Nate ran his hands through his hair, his chest heaving. "We can't keep running. The island's too small. The lake surrounds everything. No matter where we go, it'll find us." His words struck like truth carved in stone. Emily's throat tightened as she realized the horror of their situation. The ferry wasn't coming. No one even knew this place existed anymore. They weren't just stranded, they had been delivered. Fed to the water like offerings. The ground beneath them vibrated faintly. At first Emily thought it was her imagination, but then the log they leaned on shifted slightly, a deep groan reverberating through the soil. Nate's eyes snapped to hers. The sound came again, low, guttural, like the earth itself breathing. Then the whispers returned. Not just from the trees this time. From beneath them. From the roots. From the soil. From the very ground they sat on. They weren't voices calling to them anymore, they were prayers. Hundreds of them, thousands, layered on top of one another. Pleas for mercy. Cries for release. Names whispered in desperation. Emily clamped her hands over her ears, but it didn't matter. The sound was inside her head. She staggered to her feet, trembling. "Nate, these aren't the people it's taken. These are the people who came before us." Her voice cracked. "It's been doing this forever." The forest shuddered violently, and through the mist she saw it, a swell of water rising unnaturally from the direction of the lake. Not a wave. A wall. It towered above the treeline, defying gravity, studded with hundreds of faces pressed into its surface. Mouths gaping. Eyes bulging. Each face screaming silently. Jason. Marcus. Lila. Chloe. Her father. Nate's brother. And countless strangers, stretching back through centuries. The wall of water lurched forward, slamming into the forest, trees snapping like matchsticks as it advanced. Nate grabbed Emily's wrist. "Run!" They sprinted blindly through the woods, branches slashing at their skin, the roar of water chasing them like a freight train. Emily's lungs screamed for air, her legs buckled with exhaustion, but adrenaline forced her forward. Through the fog, she saw the faint outline of the shore ahead. The docks. The place where they'd first arrived. The last place they'd been safe. They burst into the clearing, the ruined dock jutting into the black water. The wall of the lake loomed behind them, its surface writhing with faces, its whispers now a deafening chant. "Come home, come home, come home." Nate turned to her, desperation blazing in his eyes. "We have to fight it." "How?" she screamed. "It's not." But she stopped. Because in that moment, she understood. The lake had never dragged anyone under by force. Not Jason. Not Lila. Not Chloe. They had all answered. They had chosen. The water could consume only what was willingly given. That was its rule. Its curse. Emily grabbed Nate's face, forcing him to meet her eyes as the water surged closer. "Don't answer it. No matter what you hear. Do you understand? Don't give it your consent." The wall of water reared above them, blotting out the moon. Voices screamed their names, every lost soul they'd ever loved calling at once. Emily's father. Nate's brother. Their friends. Their own voices, too, twisted and distorted, begging them to surrender. Nate squeezed her hand until it hurt, his jaw set, his body trembling. Then we don't answer. The wall crashed down. Darkness. Cold. Silence. Emily opened her eyes to sunlight. She was lying on the dock, soaked, shivering, but alive. The lake rippled gently, birds chirped in the trees. No faces in the water. No voices. Just a lake as ordinary as any other. Nate lay beside her, coughing, but alive too. They staggered to their feet, clinging to one another, staring at the water in stunned silence. The ferry dock was still empty, rotting, abandoned. But the whispers were gone. Emily turned to Nate, her voice shaking. Did we win? His expression was hollow, his eyes locked on the still surface of the lake. No, he whispered. We didn't feed it. Not this time. But it's not done. It's never done. Emily followed his gaze. For a moment, the lake looked harmless. And then, just for a second, she thought she saw ripples spelling out words across its surface. Words only for her. Next time,